Alright, hello. So, The Hero's Journey was devised by Joseph Campbell in 1948 in his book, The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And essentially what it is it's his observation of one of the most commonly found structures within, in his time, contemporary texts, and also ancient, specifically ancient Greek mythological tales as well. And what it is it's a cyclical structural arc, uh, as demonstrated here, in its most simplest form, I should add. It's a cyclical arc that typically a character goes through in order to denote to themselves some form of significant change that often ends in a positive light, in a positive outcome. Now, the reason why this specific arc is both effective and also sustainable, and by sustainable I mean it's still used today very prevalently. It's the most commonly, as I said, used typical used arc. The reason why it's so effective is because of how positive and often therapeutic the outcomes of the arc can be to the reader, but also to the character. Now, what do I mean by therapeutic? Well, a lot of these arcs are typically placed with, and this is Campbell's observation. If we were to use things like the Odyssey, for example, or the Iliad, a lot of the tales in which this arc was found in often are tales of war, or tales in which the character begins the journey in a state of trauma, or they've just have witnessed or have had something taken away from them in a traumatic way. Now, this is the call to adventure, which happens in Act 1 or before Act 1. And this is what sets them off on that journey to become changed. Or maybe they don't know that they need to be changed or want to be changed. Either way can be inspiring. But they make their way through Act 1 out of the place that they know, out of that sense of comfortability, that sense of reliability, into Act 2, in which they cross off over a threshold into the unknown, into the unreliable, into places where they feel uncomfortable and they feel like they're greater danger to themselves or to the environment or to people within that unknown threshold. And in the middle of Act 2 or to the end of Act 2, whichever sees fit to the story or to your story, that character has to go through a significant change, a significant death of maybe themselves spiritually, or essentially the death of a part of themselves that they're holding on to that is negative. That is removed from them, or they are able to process that grief or trauma, whatever. But if we're going with the trauma sort of narrative, they're able to process it, or they find a way, or a method rather, to process it effectively. And they come out of that unknown threshold, or rather, that unknown threshold sort of merges with the known, and now they're familiar with both sides. But they come out into Act 3, where they face a sense of atonement, whether that's atonement to themselves or atonement from someone else upon them, and they return to their status quo with that knowledge and with that newly attained ability or skill or mental state, or they feel a sense of clarity within themselves that sparks change, and most importantly brings them to a point in which they can return to that home or city or town and feel like they've grown and developed. And that's what I mean by it can be a very therapeutic mode of storytelling. And that's why it's so effective, and that's why it's so used today. Now, what I want to talk about is what if we were to do this in a reverse order? Now, that obviously begs the question, why would we want to do this? I mean, the whole point of this is it's a therapeutic form of storytelling. It's a very simple form of storytelling. It's a very flexibly complex form of storytelling, and I'll get into why I call it that towards the end. But yeah, why would we want to do that? Well, the point of stories, or not the point of stories, that's very forward. One of the reasons why we tell stories is to reveal parts of ourselves, or to experience part of ourselves in a heightened sense of surrealism or whimsy, that in that elevation that fiction can take us and can take our mind and can take our how we view ourselves, we can experience and find things about ourselves that we wouldn't perhaps know through we wouldn't perhaps be able to experience immediately through our own real and own life experiences, that fiction wouldn't be able to grant us with that immediate sense of change or perspective, right? And so that's why these are effective. Now, tragedy, specifically, the point of tragedy is to reveal our deepest discomforts and do it in such a brutally realistic way and brutally realistic depiction of grief and trauma. Now, that can be found within the hero's journey, and even not just at the start where you have that call to adventure, all throughout, even in the middle point or even in the third act, it can still be very prevalent. However, similar moral lessons can be found through a failed hero rather than a successful hero. But it's not failure because he tried to change. It's failure in spite of his change. It is the understanding that because even though he went through that arc of change, he still wasn't able to fully be able to realize that within himself. And it's important that if we are to do it in this reversal order, and not necessarily specifically undo every single aspect of it. The reason why Joseph Campbell's structure can be done in such a way is that it, in its principle, is a suggestion rather than a definitive rigid arc. It can seem that way because it's been done in such a way for so long, but he was making an observation, not a definitive, like, this is how it's done. He's just saying this is how we've typically, habitually sort of done stories in this way. There are 35 odd points that are meant to be on here that I haven't added for simplicity's sake. And that's why it's so flexibly complex, is that you can take different aspects in and out and essentially muddy it around, and that's why we're able to do it in that reverse order. The hero still remains on a journey, but it is how we want to depict that journey and the lessons we want to get from that journey, not just from the character and the lessons we want that character to get from that journey, but it's the lessons we want to be able to find within ourselves. And that's why doing it in a reverse order is so effective. Now, oftentimes, not oftentimes, what I'm going to suggest is, if we were to do it in this order, this area here is the most contentious point, because in the normal version, as I'm sure you remember, that's that point of change. But it can also be a point of change within a reverse order. The important thing is that change isn't enough, and that change isn't enough for them to see within themselves or be able to apply to the world that would grant them that ability to overcome whatever adversity they're facing within themselves. Like I've said before, it's not a active undoing of what Joseph Campbell devised, and it's not a means to do things in spite of things. It's a method we can a method to tell ourselves something different and to get something different out of the hero's journey that it wouldn't ordinarily do. We wouldn't ordinarily be able to see a side of that if we had done it in a different way, or if we had done it in the traditional way. And that's all that it is, essentially. And yeah, that's about it. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you for watching.